Good afternoon and welcome to the Fuels Institute's contributor-only live webinar presentation of implications of the new CAFE proposal. We appreciate all of you being here with us. We've teamed up with Stratas Advisors to provide a non-biased discussion about the implications of the recent proposal. Our presenters you see on your screen are John Eichberger, Executive Director of the Fuels Institute, and Christopher Brown, Analyst, Global Automotive of Stratas Advisors. Our discussion will last approximately 25 to 30 minutes. However, our presenters are very interested in your questions. So please feel free to send your questions to me or the panelists. If you look in your chat box below on your right-hand corner, you can send those questions over and I will be sure to raise those at the end of the discussion. And because our panelists can actually see your questions, they themselves may actually address it during their discussion. If you have any technical difficulties during this session, please email me at dwoods@fuelsinstitute.org. That's DWOODS@fuelsinstitute.org. Finally, if you want to be added to our newsletter or to be notified of our next webinar, please also email me directly and I will be sure to include you. Now we invite you to listen in as we join John Eichberger and Christopher Brown as they discuss the implications of the new CAFE proposal.
Thanks, Donovan. And everybody, as you guys know, Donovan likes to be the guy behind the curtain, which is why his camera is not working. But it's nice to have a voice kind of coming in like the voice of God when you go to a conference telling you it's time to go here or go there. So we'll be coordinating what we're doing today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in a second. Where we're going to run this today is I'm going to give a couple introductory comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris to provide more insight from the Stratas perspective on the latest proposal, and then I'll give some perspective of my own. A couple of caveats. We know that this is an active rulemaking process. Comments are being filed. Lawsuits are being filed. It's very important to recognize that neither Chris nor I are parties to the litigation, are engaging in amicus to the regulations. We're not doing anything of those types. We are just taking a look at what information we have available and providing perspective. From our perspective, it should also be noted that our perspective does not mean it's right. It's one perspective kind of designed to drive some discussion and get people thinking maybe a little different way or a little more critically about what's going on in front of us. I will, for myself, another caveat, the Fuels Institute, I'm speaking on behalf of John Eichberger. I'm not speaking on behalf of any individual company of the Fuels Institute. We have many who are directly impacted by this proposed regulation, and I do not at any point try to put myself forward as a spokesperson for any of those organizations. So with that, what we want to do today is kind of look at the proposal. I think it's called the Safe and Fuel Efficient Proposal. And it's going to have possibly some significant implications for the market. And what I've been receiving questions about is, hey, John, does this proposal undermine the direction of electric vehicle market development? Does it perpetuate the role of the internal combustion engine? Does it slow down the pace of advancements in fuel efficiency? How does it affect the relationship between other global markets? Well, we don't know yet, but I'm going to turn it over to Chris here, and he's going to kind of give us their overview assessment of what's been going on in the market and help us kind of get a better understanding where we are. Then I'll come back and provide some of my perspectives. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and have him walk us through what they've been looking at.
John, thanks for having us. First of all, thanks for including Stratas in this conversation. I do think it's an important one to have. And I know we're on a little bit of a quick timeline here, so I won't spend too much of the pleasantries, but we do appreciate it. And so I like to start these conversations off typically with a level setting of what CAFE actually is. Yes, it started a few years ago, and we're all a little bit familiar with it, but I find that if we move on to the next slide, we are able to kind of level set and start ourselves on even footing. Corporate average fuel efficiency standards really creates the minimum threshold for OEMs, for manufacturers, in order to participate in the American market. It's obviously government program that's run from NHTSA and the EPA to make sure that the vehicles in the United States are increasing their fuel efficiencies, and both to be more efficient on the fuel side, but also to the EPA covers the greenhouse gas aspects, and obviously we know that we can play between the two of those pretty fluently through known ratios. When CAFE started in 2012, we all heard the 54.5 mile per gallon target that was set then. It got ramped down in 2016 to 51.4 as the regulators were able to see that the fleet was changing. That time coming out of the financial crisis, and everyone, that pent-up demand from the financial crisis started to dissipate, coupled with more approachable fuel prices at that point. The consumer started moving toward SUVs, CUVs, trucks, and those are typically less efficient than your smaller vehicles will be. I have up here the graphic to show the differentiation between what is the CAFE number and what is the sticker number, or the EPA number we call it. We're all a bit more familiar with the sticker number just because that's much closer to what we get in our vehicles. That's based off of a 5 test cycle, whereas the CAFE number is based off of just 2 cycles. So obviously the more data you get, the more different driving situations that are a bit closer to what real driving is, the lower those numbers tend to be. So I think this is always an interesting graphic to start off with, just to draw the explanation. As a rule of thumb, I tend to just take between 1/4 and 1/3 off the top of what the CAFE number is, and that usually is a pretty good idea of just what the consumer is likely to see. So as we move on, we can see that I've isolated just the small passenger cars and the small trucks to show the original CAFE line for their required fuel economy as that bucket. So by 2025, we were looking at 60 miles per gallon on the CAFE scale for passenger cars and 50 miles per gallon on the small trucks. That is a pretty big increase from the mid-40s and mid-30s that we are today. And as you see, there is inflection in that chart to speed things up as we get into the 2020s. So if we move on, I've isolated what the 2020 freeze would be. So the Safe Vehicles Rule is proposed to freeze the fuel economy standards required at the 2020 level through 2025, 2026. So in that time frame, obviously there won't be an improvement there, but it's always interesting to look and see that the 2020 freeze actually takes the passenger car level to below where the original CAFE level was going to be for small trucks. So all that is to say, long story short, it is a significant change in terms of just what is being required or what would be required. They're talking right now in Dearborn, Michigan, taking comment on this, and tomorrow they're in Pittsburgh. So anybody in the Pennsylvania area, feel free to run on over there and make your voice heard on it if that's what you choose to do. In terms of the 2020 freeze, just the levels for small cars, because that's what we've got isolated here, would be 49 miles per gallon, and for small trucks would be 39 miles per gallon. So to put those into the window sticker parlay, that's 36 miles per gallon for small cars and 29 miles per gallon for small trucks. To put that again into more context, the 2018 Toyota Corolla, that's the 4-cylinder, the base model, is currently getting 34 miles per gallon, I'm sorry. So there is still gain to be had there. We're not there yet. The Chevy Colorado, they're a small truck with their base engine, the 4-cylinder, that's getting 22 miles per gallon right now. So there is a significant gain to be had there before 2022. I would want to point out that as part of the CAFE process, there is the possibility of claiming off-cycle credits for additional overcompliance based off of what OEMs think were missed in the original process. So if they put in some additional technologies like lightweighting or downsizing or changing the engine combination or some of the other more technical aspects of the engine, they're then able to go back and claim some credit. So that would then come away from that 29 or that 49 to 39 miles per gallon level. So what does all of this mean for fuel demand? As we move on, we've gone ahead and plotted out what the average fuel requirement will do based off of fuel efficiencies across the fleet as we see it at that time. By the end of the 2020s, we're projecting about 600,000 barrels a day of net increase of light-duty fuel demand. I know the government, I've seen numbers of 500,000 thrown around, but there's not really a date tag to that. So we went ahead and tied it to the end of the decade. So 2029, 2030, we're looking at about 600,000 barrels of additional fuel demand. So that is, it's only, yeah, sure, it's only 3% of the total fuel demand in the country. But if you look over in 2015, that's a significant portion of that uptick through 2019 and then the fall when the CAFE vehicles really came into the fleet in force. And I believe John's going to talk a little bit later on about some of the apparatus by which everything moves through the fleet. But as we move forward, I wanted to talk briefly on the Stratas fleet. We are projecting that by the end of the decade, by 2028, say, there will only be about we're looking at about a 6% gasoline decrease. So we're projecting from 89% down to 83%. Gasoline is still king in the U.S. It will remain so, regardless of either this proposal or staying with the original. Americans like their gasoline vehicles. We don't see that changing very much. We remain and have been pretty bearish on alternatives coming through in terms of different fuels coming through. As we move on to the next slide, I've blown up the electric vehicles, hybrids, and plug-in hybrids. We're projecting that, yes, they're going to grow, but they will still be less than 10% of the total fleet by 2028. We're showing and we're forecasting that the total hybrid number in the fleet will be about 4% of the overall fleet at that point, and both electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids will be about 2% each of the total fleet at that point. So even with the rules as they were, we have elected to be a little bit more bearish about it. Reasons behind that include, for electric vehicles specifically, infrastructure issues, perceived range issues. Even though the majority of driving occurs for electric vehicles within 60 or 80 miles of the home, and almost all of them have that range at this point, and upwards of 90% of the charging occurs at the home, people still are very used to driving their vehicles and looking on the side of the road and seeing a place where they can fill themselves up. And it's in the psyche of the driver just as much as it's in anything else. And we don't see that changing in the near term. In terms of what we think this proposal will, the effects that it will have, for one, we think that the momentum of increase for fuel economy is likely to slow, but it's not going to stall. Like I said, vehicles for the 2020 model year, there still has to be improvement there for the fuel economy to meet that standard. It seems as though the big transformational technologies are they're already in place in a way. We don't see that there will be big, all new powertrains coming out in the next decade or so. We view it as more of an incremental gain at this point in order to build on the technologies that are being developed, capitalize on the R&D that's been put in already, and maximize on the global aspect of vehicle design, the interchangeability of the fleet around the world at this point. China is obviously still a major world player. It will remain so whether the U.S. changes their fuel economy standards or not. If anything, it will help them and Chinese producers to be that much more forward in the discussion, particularly because should these standards change in the U.S., the need for mass electrification in order to hit those numbers lessens. Along with that, it is possible, I mean, this is conjecture because I haven't seen it written anywhere, but it would make logical sense that there would be less incentivization around electric vehicles moving forward if they're not strictly necessary. There may be a little bit more pressure on traditional powertrains to incorporate the technology that's been built up already and has been put into place largely at small levels, yes, but increasingly larger at each step. So without those incentives, the electric vehicle market in the U.S. could be in a little bit of a headwind. So my last point is the average new vehicle in the U.S. costs about $36,000. The average used vehicle in the U.S. costs about $20,000. Vehicles are being held in the fleet longer. So as vehicles continue to be purchased through the fleet and purchased into the fleet and new ones get scrapped, that will elevate the entire fleet's fuel economy. So all in all, it is an incremental game at this point. It's not a transformational game. So if I could just reiterate that, that's where I think our big takeaway is.
Thank you, Chris. So just real quick before we move off this slide, I want to clarify this forecast is based upon the existing fuel economy program, not the SAFE proposal, correct?
That's correct, yes. We have not gone back to formally adjust our forecast yet, given the uncertainty of it all, given that there is, as you mentioned, the litigation outstanding. There's just a lot to be sorted out in terms of the formal processing that we do here, but we have gone through rigorous qualitative and what-if scenarios to work up how we think the different economic forces will play through.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that kind of context, what I want to do now is, if I can get my computer work here, is kind of walk through some of the stuff I've looked at. I published an article on a blog a couple weeks ago that looked at a very specific set of data within the proposal I thought was relevant. And I always try to take this from a very simplistic approach, looking at the market, looking at the market turnover, and looking at the what-ifs, and try to give a better broad understanding of how things might play out in the market. So first of all, let's take a look. Last 3 years, we've sold about 51, almost 52 million light-duty vehicles in the United States, and this is the breakdown. 94% were gas and internal combustion engine, about 3% were diesel, and that top purple bar there represents about 2% a year were hybrids. And keep in mind, hybrids run on gasoline. So you're really looking at 96% of the vehicles sold in the United States over the last 3 years were gas and internal combustion engine. And as I mentioned when I kicked this off, a lot of the questions are, okay, what's going to happen to alternative technologies? Are they going to be able to gain market share? I think Chris kind of alluded that, with the freeze at 2020, it could slow down the rate of market growth for technologies like electrified vehicles. And we'll see that plays out. But a lot of the production streams are already in place. A lot of the technologies are been proven and put into the design elements for the new vehicles. So we'll see if the market shifts dramatically because of this proposal, at least in the first couple of years that we're looking into the future here. And I think one of the key things is fleet turnover rate. One of the major assumptions in the proposed rule, which I think is absolutely accurate, if you slow down the number of new vehicles purchased every year, you slow down the rate of improvement in fleet fuel efficiency. Makes sense. If we're not replacing older vehicles with new vehicles at a rapid clip, then the pace of change will slow down. This is a chart I put together a long time ago. I updated it here a couple weeks ago with 2018 numbers. It basically shows how long it takes to turn over the market. So this chart is showing that if we sold, starting January 1, 2018, if every new vehicle was equipped with something new, let's say higher fuel economy technology, whatever it is, something new, that new thing will take 9 years before 50% of the fleet is turned over and half the cars on the road have that new technology. Think about that. 100% market conversion will take 9 years to get 50% of the market turned over to new technology. So that's kind of the baseline we're looking at here when we think about what the next few years might look like. So I took a look at the proposal and said, okay, if we lose sales, what's the impact on fleet turnover rates? If the argument is we don't sell as many new vehicles, fuel economy improvements and safety improvements will slow down on a fleet-wide basis. So I took that same chart I just showed you, discounted sales by 5% and 10%. See, what does it do to fleet turnover? 5 and 10% drop in sales is about, 5% would be about 800,000 vehicles into 1.6 million vehicles not sold year over year. That's a big number. But what would happen is that those rates of discounted sales, instead of 9 years to get 50% market penetration, it would take 11 or 12 years to turn over half the market. So we ask ourselves, is 2 or 3 years going to make a huge difference in terms of the overall fuel efficiency of the fleet, the overall safety of the fleet, and is the proposed regulations going to avert that? One of the things in the proposal is the assumption that higher vehicle prices would slow down sales. We take that on face value, assume that if prices go up in order to achieve the current Obama-era regulations, then you can assume that could have a deflationary impact on sales. Don't know if it will or not, but that's kind of the argument. But the question I raise is, what price delta would be required to turn 5 or 10% of sales out of the market? And we don't know what that number would be. I took a look at some numbers we had on a recent publication the Fuels Institute released, looking at vehicle sales over 15 years. And this chart here is showing the average MSRP difference between 2011 and 2016 for the top 4 selling models in each one of these classes. And what you'll see is about half of them went up in price and about half of them went down in price. But every single one of them had an increase in units sold. Now, not necessarily equal. We know that there's been a change in terms of what consumers are buying. They're turning to utility vehicles, the crossover utility vehicles much more frequently than they have in the past, and that had an 80% increase in total units sold. What we're seeing here is a price delta of anywhere from $12,000 to say $3,000 at that time period did not have an impact on units sold. We still had an increase in total units sold by class for the most price over luxury and a couple of the larger vehicles, except for they had an increase in units sold for all of them. Discount prices and some of the other models there, as you see. But what happened? Why were people still buying vehicles even though prices may have been going up? We have to put it in context. 2011, 2016 was a recovery period. The auto industry hit rock bottom in 2008 during the Great Recession. Since 2009, 2010, the market's been recovering. So you've seen people go back into the market. The economy has been strong. Growth has been strong. There's so many factors going into it. You have to ask yourself, what could derail continued growth in the market? Is it price? Again, we don't know. I've seen presentations that argue that in order to meet the 2025 standards set forth in the Obama-era CAFE program, it would increase the average price of vehicles by $4,000 over 2015. So the average price of vehicle in 2015, to meet the 2025 standard, in 2025, that vehicle goes up in price by $4,000 because of the technology requirements. Is $4,000 in average MSRP increase enough to derail 5 or 10% market share of new cars sold? Don't know. It might, The argument would be that yes, the administration thinks it would. This indicates that depending on the economic factors going on around the auto industry, maybe it would not. But then again, maybe it would. If the economy starts to slow down, we start having some concerns about disposable income, people might turning away from the new vehicle market. Chris raised an interesting point when he mentioned the price of used vehicles. And one of the things I've read recently raises some more concerns to me about the future of new car sales than the price. It's the fact that the used car market is almost a 40 million unit market a year. We sell about 17 million new cars and vehicles. We sell about 40 million used cars and vehicles. What's the difference here? About 20-25% of those are coming off lease, which means that they're 2 to 3 years old. A lot of people like to describe them as gently used, but a leased vehicle coming off typically is fairly well loaded, and it comes in with a very low price for people to purchase relative to a new car. 3 or 4 years ago, consumers started leasing not just four-door sedans, but leasing crossover utility vehicles, being #1 selling vehicle in the market. 35% of all new cars sold last year were crossovers. If we're starting to see a flood of crossover vehicles coming to the market that are being offered for maybe $16,000 off of the average price of a new vehicle, as Chris mentioned, that there may have more of an impact on the sale of new vehicles than the increase in price. It's something you got to pay attention to. It's one of those things that we're trying to point out at the Fuels Institute is you cannot look at one metric and have that determine your projection of what the future is going to be. There's too many variables involved. We might see an increase in price. We might see a slowdown in the economy. We might see an increase in attractive, well-priced, used pre-owned lease vehicles coming on the market. All those could impact the new vehicle sales market. But if the theory is, if we lose the sales of new vehicles, that's going to slow down the rate of improvement, there's a lot of variables we need to be thinking about that could impact that. Now, that brings us to the question about electrification that I get all the time. And this is the question that Chris is alluding to as well, that electrified vehicles might slow in terms of their market penetration because of the new program. Well, let's take a look at what we're talking about here. So I put this together, and this chart basically shows the following. In 2016 to 17, battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles increased their sales units sold by 26%. Not making any judgment on this, but let's assume that rate of increase of 26% continues through 2025. And then let's say by then the volume gets so big and 26% is not attainable anymore, and let's say it discounts to 20% through 2035. So sales of BEVs and plug-in hybrids increased by between 20 and 26% year over year between 2017 and 2035. In 2035, they would amass a 43% share of all new vehicles sold, but only 10% of vehicles on the market. And of that 10% of vehicles on the market, half are expected to be plug-in hybrids, which means they still have internal combustion engines. So going back to Chris's chart about the anticipated demand for liquid fuels, we're still seeing by 2035, under this model, 95% of vehicles on the road would still be liquid-fueled internal combustion engine. That's important to keep in mind when we think about the pace of electrification. In the absence of aggressive CAFE programs, would the auto industry be required or be desiring to introduce electrified vehicles at a rapid pace? Currently, most of the public press I've read is these vehicles are not profitable right now. If we look at some other examples in terms of market support, when there are tax incentives involved to sell these vehicles, consumers buy them. When those tax incentives are decreased or eliminated, they stop buying them as rapidly as they used to. All these things play in. Chris made a very good point. This is a global automotive industry. The U.S. is not the only country in the world into which the automakers are delivering vehicles, not the only country in the world that has or does not have a fuel efficiency program. The Fuels Institute published a report last fall looking at global programs. Don't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like 40 countries have some sort of fuel efficiency requirement or emissions program that translates into fuel economy. The auto industry needs to satisfy all that. The technology investment, the investments in technology to bring in more fuel efficient vehicles aren't going to be thrown over the side because they've already been made to a large extent. So I believe we're going to continue to see electrified vehicles come on the market. I believe the cost of those vehicles will continue to come down because as more vehicles are brought to market, more production increases, the cost per unit will go down, technology will continue to advance, and eventually they'll be able to sold be able to be sold at a price where the automakers can make some money and then makes economic sense for the consumer, in which case the market will drive electrification. I don't see a big roadblock being dropped in front of them because, quite frankly, I've been a little skeptical at the pace of market adoption anyways. I think this chart's an aggressive one, but it just reflects what the current sales rate has been. So as we think about where we are and where we're going with the industry and what the implications of this program might be, I think Chris's chart showing that we're going to continue to grow in fuel efficiency through 2020, and then it's going to stall on the regulatory requirements. I think that's going to give the auto industry some time to catch up, and they will probably continue to beat those standards. Clearly, there are several lawsuits filing. There's a lot of concern about how it's going to be regulated and how it's going to be implemented with respect to the California Air Program and the harmonization there, or lack of harmonization there. What's going to happen with the administration's efforts to eliminate California's exemption to the Clean Air Act for setting different fuel economy programs. All these things are still up in the air. But one of the things we know for certain is that the market is a very strong market, and my guess is, I think Chris agrees with me with his comments, that advancements in fuel efficiency will continue, and we'll still continue to see the market develop. And with that, that ends up my formal comments. I'll open it up to see if we have any questions, or I think Donovan had a few questions too he was going to field here as well.
Currently, we do not have any questions from our listeners. Let me just double check if you do. Does not look like it. But let me ask you this, John. You mentioned consumers and their purchasing habits. Do consumers really pay attention to this legislation? If the new CAFE rules changed, do they pay attention to it, and does it truly affect what they're going to decide to purchase?
We constantly have the headlines saying that consumers buy vehicles based upon fuel economy and based upon what the price of gasoline is. The data we've seen over the last 15 years, consumers buy what they need. If they need a utility vehicle, or they need a pickup truck, or they need a commuting vehicle, they buy within the class vehicle that meets their needs. At that point, a number of factors come in. We've done some surveys with the Fuel Institute that show that the cost of the vehicle is number one issue, and the next issue is fuel economy. The Auto Alliance has shared with us data where fuel economy actually ranks down in like 25 to 30 range of priority. So the question is, do consumers, are they going to buy or not buy a vehicle based on the sticker fuel economy? If they need to buy a vehicle, they're going to buy a vehicle. The choice between a new and a used vehicle, the fuel economy is not going to drive that. It's the cost of the acquisition. And if the administration's right and we continue to bring in new vehicles to market, even if we stall, that we freeze fuel efficiency improvements at 2020 levels, those vehicles for the next 6 years are going to come in with higher fuel efficiency than the ones that are replacing. And that's kind of the whole idea of turning over the market, bringing in more fuel efficient vehicles to the market, replacing older vehicles. You know, we used to talk about, is the customer who's buying a big pickup truck doing anything good for the economy? Well, at that pickup truck 10 years old, they're probably doubling their fuel economy. And so, or at least improving it by 50% or more. So the benefits of doing that are still strong. So there's still a great benefit to the market of bringing new vehicles to the market. But I don't think that fuel economy label at the dealership is going to make or break the new sale. I think it'll make the customer decide, I'm going to buy this utility vehicle over that utility vehicle, but it's not going to make them walk away from the dealership. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's largely an economic proposition rather than a choice around fuel economy. I think it's going to be consumer want. We've got OEMs are moving toward making more utility vehicles, whether they're CUVs or SUVs. I'm from Texas, and if I want a truck, I'm getting a truck. That's kind of the argument down here. That said, to kind of couple on with your used market idea and the leasing concept, people that want the car, they're going to get the car they want, even if that means that they have to go on a 3-year lease at $450 or $500 a month versus buying the new one that is averaging $36,000 at $1,000 a month. It's an economic proposition. The fuel cost itself, we don't see that being a dominant driver in that decision. Fuel costs in the short run is highly inelastic. If I've got a car and I've got to get to work, I'm still going to get in my car and go to work. That's that. If all of a sudden gasoline doubles or whatever goes up by some huge multiplier like that, in my refresh cycle, in my personal buying cycle, if it's still up there, that may factor in at that point. But in the short run, I've got a car, I've got to still drive my car.
You made a good point. I was at a conference last week, or the week before, the North American International Powertrain Conference, and Bob Lutz, former vice chairman of General Motors, was lamenting the way we sell cars now. We're not selling cars based upon their $30,000 or their $40,000. We're selling cars based upon what the monthly payment is. Now, if you think about that, let's assume the average lease payment structure is 60 months, which we know it's getting up to 70, 72, 76, 80, 84 months. But let's assume a 5-year payback period. A $2,000 increase in price is about $30 a month before interest. And so, if we see a change in value of the vehicle, at the point of purchase, the consumer is worried about what am I paying per month, not so much, what's my fuel economy or anything like that. It's all about what's that monthly payment. That drives most sales and most negotiations these days. Donovan?
Well, gentlemen, we have a few questions. Let me start with the first that came in. Why won't diesel fuels see greater advances when you're looking at about 30% fuel economy improvement?
The market for diesel has been stuck at about 2 to 3% of light-duty vehicles for as long as I've been watching it. And I think you got a diehard group. Now, you've got several companies that said we're not going to bring diesel to market. Porsche this week said we're not producing any more diesel vehicles. You've got Mercedes-Benz saying we're not bringing diesel to the market. Volkswagen Auto Group said we're not bringing Volkswagen diesels back to the market. The surveys we've done on consumer relations to diesel, the scandals have no real impact on them. The people who like diesels, there's about 43% of consumers said that they would consider diesel for the next vehicle. Does not mean they buy it, because clearly they're not. But they said they would consider it because of the fuel efficiency improvements. The biggest hurdle to diesel is the fact that the posted retail price for diesel compared to regular unleaded is a 30 to 50 cent delta. Now, if you get consumers who are comparing premium fuel, gasoline to diesel, it's about a wash. But that regular to diesel jump, consumers are not making the economic calculation that I'm getting 20, 30% more miles per gallon, so it offsets that delta at the pump. They're really concerned. I don't know if I want to buy diesel. People that need work trucks, they like diesel, they're committed to it, they understand the value, and they're not going anywhere. That's why you're seeing the automakers, at least the U.S. automakers, bringing diesel vehicles to market, SUVs and pickup trucks, and GM brought a couple more passenger cars last year. So you're seeing some new vehicles come to market that are diesel, but I really don't think that niche is going to get above 3%, 3.5%. Chris, you guys have been looking at this as well.
Yeah, largely to echo what you go with, it's the cost of it all at the pump. It's the incremental every week, every month cost for the consumer. Obviously, diesels are biased toward heavier cars. They're biased toward towing vehicles because of the torque. People, like you say, that want the truck, that want that Tahoe, that want that Grand Cherokee, they're going to go get that. And whether they will end up hauling or not, it's for them. I'm getting into shady, like behavioralist economics here, but it's an identity thing sometimes. And those are the diehards, like you said, they identify as I'm a diesel guy. But largely, we don't see it growing an appreciable amount.
Yeah, I was watching a program just the other day. I don't even remember what program it was, and they were talking about people like to buy to the extreme. I may never have to do this, but if I have to do that, I better have the equipment I need to do it. So pickup truck owners, I've bought many, many pickup trucks in my life. It's like, I may never have to pull 10,000 pounds, but if I want to pull 10,000 pounds, I better be able to. Donovan, people may be thinking I'm contradicting some things I said. Earlier I said that fuel prices don't drive consumer behavior at the point of purchase of a vehicle. And they don't when it comes to what kind of vehicle, but when it comes to powertrains, it has an impact. When gas prices go up, interest in hybrids and battery electric vehicles and looking at diesel vehicles increases, because when prices at the pump are going up, consumers are going, okay, what things are available for me to offset that? And then they weigh whether or not they want to buy a hybrid at a higher price or an electric vehicle with recharging infrastructures, where diesel vehicles has a higher purchase price and a higher fuel price. And so that will influence their interest in alternatives, but it does not change their needs. So if they need a pickup truck or utility vehicle, they're not going to go buy a compact. And so within the powertrain that they're comfortable with, prices usually don't have an impact, but if they're looking at saving money at the pump, they will consider alternative powertrains.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have another question, and that is, will both of you comment on what you think automakers are doing today to develop their vehicles to satisfy CAFE or safe standards? Also, are new model vehicles currently being designed to accommodate the rolled back miles per gallon mandates?
Chris, you want to start or you want me to start?
I'll go for it. In terms of the technologies that they're employing, so actually I'll take the second question first. The vehicle design process, the typical lifestyle of a vehicle is anywhere from 6 to 9 years, give or take. As soon as that new vehicle gets put on the lot for model year 1 for the new Corolla or whatever it is, they're starting right away with the next one. It takes that long to get a whole new vehicle put together. So are they building vehicles now to meet the 2025 standard? Yeah, they are. We're starting to see things like that go in. They're planning things out years in advance. So it may mean that if this rule goes through, some of that more expensive technology that is not scaled up to the point of being an affordable add-on, that may get taken off for gains that are above and beyond in a big way what is going to be necessary. But in terms of sort of the vehicle development cycle, it's that long of a runway. To go after the second question, what are they doing? You're seeing vehicles in terms of the materials that are being used, they're being lightweighted. So on trucks, you're seeing aluminum and high-strength steel rather than traditional rolled and pressed steel. You're seeing downsizing of engines, so going from your 3-liter engine displacement down to your 2.3-liter, but they're putting a turbocharger on it. So you're getting the same performance, if not better performance, out of your newer engine that is both smaller in displacement, more efficient, and has some sort of forced induction on it. They're also working through how they distribute the fuel within the engine. They're doing that more cleanly now. Some auto manufacturers, Mazda for example, are mimicking some of the diesel technology, because diesel doesn't use spark plugs, so it just burns off of compression, and that makes for a very rich, very efficient burn of the fuel. So there are any number of different technologies that are going in, and there is a wide variety of how cost effective it is versus. So we actually, I didn't put this chart in it, but we monitor the marginal gain, so 1% gain in fuel efficiency versus the cost that it would be for that 1% gain. The easiest gain is changing your tires. You're seeing slicker tires, seeing lower profile tires in some cases, and making your vehicle lighter. So there are hundreds of ways that they're adding to the fuel efficiency of the vehicle. And like I said before, when technology is not necessarily appreciated, taken into account in the initial CAFE standard for that model, OEMs and manufacturers are going back to the EPA, to NHTSA, and saying, we don't think you guys gave us enough credit for these dampening levers on the front of our car that are making it more fuel efficient, that are actually lowering the air pressure, or the I'm blanking on the word, where air stops the car. Drag resistance, yes, thank you. So I've mumbled on long enough about this, and I know John's got a whole lot to talk about it, but there are lots and lots of ways that they're improving the fuel efficiency.
And a couple other things. I didn't put the chart in there either, but I got a chart that I've used in presentations that show that the number of four-cylinder engines in this market have absolutely gone through the roof. I think overall the light-duty vehicle market is now like 55, 60% four-cylinder engine. When you take out light-duty trucks and do passenger cars, 86% of passenger cars are now four-cylinder. So that's a much more fuel-efficient vehicle. Now, as Chris said, they're using a lot of turbocharging. The auto industry is looking for a little bit of help, too, from the fuel side. As you increase compression ratio and throw a boosted system onto an engine, you need higher knock resistance. So there's some discussion about how do we raise the octane level in the gasoline market to enable more efficient internal combustion engine design. In the interim, a lot of vehicles are going to stop-start technology. It's that annoying thing when you come to a red light, your engine cuts off and it kicks back on when you take your foot off the brake. So that's becoming much more prevalent. There's a lot of small things they're doing here and there, and those things aren't going to slow down. Those things are going to keep going. So keep in mind, the fuel efficiency strategy is not only a compliance mechanism. It's a competitive structure. It is a consumer behavior and consumer benefit. Take a look at your advertising going on when you're watching football on Sunday. How many commercials are claiming such and such best in class in fuel economy? They're jamming that down our throats constantly. Why? Because the consumer wants that. They want to feel that way. Does it change what they buy? Not necessarily, but they want to feel like they got a deal. They want to feel like they got good fuel efficiency. Consumers tell us all the time that they're going to shop around for the best price of gasoline, when in reality they're going to go where it's most convenient. But they want people to think, I got a deal on gas, I got a deal on a fuel efficient car, I got a deal on my vehicle that I purchased. How many times you talk to people and they immediately start going into the deal they were able to negotiate? Comes down to a perception of value, not always a real value, but perception. So the auto industry wants to continue bringing these technologies to market to improve that consumer feeling about pride in the vehicle they purchased. That is a huge marketing pitch that we cannot forget about. We've had Matthew Wilcox, a consumer behavior expert, do a lot of stuff for us at the Fuels Institute, and he's always constantly reminding us that reality and perception aren't always the same, but for the consumer, their perception is their reality, and so you better feed into that perception. And by bringing these technologies to market that you can then promote as fuel-efficient gains, that's a great marketing tool for the automakers. That's my comment.
Excellent, excellent, gentlemen. We have another one that is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to bear with me as I get this out. Both of you have indicated that by 2023, both of you have indicated the 2023 fuel economy is a driver. Though the OEMs, for the most part, have the engines that are close to being ready to drop into the vehicle. So do you see the OEMs making a marked change in their strategies to bring those global requirements to the U.S.?
I mean, I'll start off. I don't see a huge change. I don't see that they're going to make massive turns. Keep in mind, regulations come and go. Regulations change. This administration came in and is proposing changes. You know, in 5-6 years, a new administration might come in and propose changes. Or the European Union has their standards, or they're trying to ship vehicles to Asia. They're going to make some tweaks. They're going to save some money here by bringing in different strategies here, maybe delay the implementation of different technologies if it makes economic sense. It keeps them competitive in the market and satisfies consumer needs. But I don't expect to see dramatic changes in their rollout strategy. Maybe just a slowdown, maybe a reduction in the urgency with which they're pushing forward new technologies. But to make massive changes because political winds have changed, I believe would be a costly, risky effort on their part, and I don't see them making those type of bets. Chris?
Yeah, I don't see that being a big change. It's the global game at this point. We may not get certain vehicles in the U.S. that we may have been slated to get before, but even with Ford saying they're killing off their entire non-SUV line and all non-truck line, that's already in play. So the little cars that are in Europe and in Asia that came to the U.S. briefly, Fiat, looking at you, like maybe not. played well here, but that sort of a decision might be an influence, but it's already moving that direction anyways because of consumer wants. Kind of coupling off of what John says, the consumer's going to want what he wants, and he's going to purchase the vehicle because for a lot of people, the car is the biggest thing that they'll own, and they want to have pride in that. Is an engine going to get swapped out because the U.S. doesn't require it? Not if it costs $1 more to make it and put it together and then ship it over here. From a pure economic sense, they'll keep it.
Perfect. So now here's a question for you. How about the E85 flex fuel market? The credits are ending soon. However, the forecasts show a steady market share. What is the long-term impact on fuel economy?
So the flex fuel vehicle, the question is a little different than a fuel economy. So the automakers are bringing flex fuel vehicles to market, and they got a CAFE credit for every unit that they produce. The credit is disappearing and now is being predicated on demonstration that the consumer, the driver of that vehicle, is buying the E85. We've done 2 studies on retail market behavior on E85 retail. It is not the winning product that a lot of people had hoped it would be. At most, you're getting about 5% throughput at a retail station. It has not become the dominant fuel of choice for the flex fuel vehicle market. There are some areas and some stores that are doing very, very well selling E85, but it's not delivering what a lot of people had thought it would deliver. And without the CAFE credit and not being able to demonstrate that consumers are buying E85 because E85 is only available in about 3,000 stores, the automakers aren't going to be producing them anymore. That being said, there's about 20 million of them on the market. It is going to take a long time for them to leave the market. And they're going to continue making them for a while because the production of them is not too expensive, not too onerous. Certification is a little more costly. But it's not necessarily a fuel economy game other than the fact that they're no longer getting CAFE credit. And so why continue to pursue that when they could pursue an optimized engine strategy that would provide much better fuel economy results for the consumer and for the regulators?
Yeah, we see them staying in the fleet as a function of fleet dynamics. If the average car is over 12 years old now, it's going to stay there. And it's back to I really like that chart of the fleet turnover. And it's another function of that dynamic in the market, I think.
Well, perfect. We have one more question, and I think you've already answered it, but I will present it just to make sure I'm not reading this incorrectly. Your future fuel mix graph showed the continued constant demand for E85 gasoline. Are OEMs still going to be developing flex fuel certified vehicles as a pathway to compliance for CAFE or safe standards?
And that's for you, Chris. I'll see if I can find that slide. I don't remember seeing that slide. Let me share my slide, my deck. Hold on.
Okay.
So I think this is the slide they're talking about. Ethanol flex fuel in here.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was just discussing, that they'll remain in fleet as a function of consumers so this is vehicle fleet, this is not sales. So these are owned vehicles on the road, and we're showing that they will remain from an 8% market in the fleet down to about a 7% by the end of this chart, as they get shifted out as a function of the fleet.
And that's consistent with studies we've done. We commissioned Tomorrow's Vehicles and published that last year. And our forecast through that is that flex fuel vehicles will represent, right now, they're about 9%, 10% of sales. By 2025, they'll be about 1% of sales. And so that's consistent with your numbers on the fleet size. It'll take time for them to work their way out of the system.
Excellent. It looks like we have no additional pending questions, and we appreciate both of you, John and Christopher, making yourselves available for this wonderful webinar. And we look forward to our next webinar, which will be held in probably mid-November, so in about another month and a half. So we thank all of you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the next contributor-only live webinar by the Fuels Institute.
Thanks, guys.